Lord, please show this black mother what to do prayer for her morning guidance. Ma'am, you need to leave immediately. This waiting room is for families of surgical patients only, and I know you're not on any list. Young lady, my son is in that operating room right now, and I have every right to be here. The charge nurse at Memorial Presbyterian Hospital's cardiac surgery wing stood with her arms crossed, blocking the hallway that led to the surgical suites. Her name tag read Jennifer Hartwell, RN, and her expression made it clear she had already made up her mind about the elderly black woman in the worn housekeeping uniform standing before her. Dorothy Mae Johnson, 68 years old, still wore her blue cotton work dress with Riverside Country Club embroidered on the pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small, worn Bible and a plastic grocery bag containing a change of clothes. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday morning in September 1985, and Dorothy Mae Johnson had been standing in this hospital corridor for nearly 20 minutes, trying to get information about her son. Other families sat comfortably in the plush waiting area behind the nurse's station, sipping coffee from real china cups, their expensive clothes and confident bearing granting them immediate access and respect. But Dorothy Mae, who smelled faintly of lemon cleaning solution and whose shoes were scuffed from years of scrubbing other people's floors, was being told she didn't belong. "I'm going to call security," Nurse Hartwell said, her voice rising. "I've checked the list 3 times. There is no Johnson family scheduled for surgery today. Now, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but his name is Dr. Marcus Thompson," Dorothy Mae said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "He's my son, and if you don't let me through this door in the next 30 seconds, you're going to have to explain to him why his mother wasn't there when he woke up." The nurse's face went pale. Several people in the waiting room had turned to watch. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Dorothy Mae Johnson had been on her knees in her small apartment on the south side of town, doing what she did every morning before the sun came up. That Tuesday morning had begun like every other morning for the past 43 years. Dorothy Mae's alarm clock went off at 4:30 a.m., the same clock she'd bought at Woolworth's back in 1965 when she'd moved to Chicago from Mississippi. The apartment was still dark and cold. She pushed herself up from her narrow bed, her knees protesting as they always did these days, and made her way to the small kitchen. The linoleum floor was clean enough to eat off of. Dorothy Mae couldn't abide a dirty floor, even in her own humble home. She put the kettle on for her morning tea, and then lowered herself carefully to her knees beside the worn sofa in her living room. This was her time, her sacred time, before the world woke up and demanded things of her. Dorothy Mae opened her Bible to the place she'd marked the night before, Psalm 143, and began to pray. "Lord, please show this black mother what to do," Dorothy Mae whispered into the pre-dawn silence. "Guide my steps today, give me strength for the work ahead, and Lord, watch over my Marcus. Wherever he is, whatever he's doing, keep him safe. Amen." Dorothy Mae had been praying that same prayer, or some version of it, for 40 years. Ever since the day her son Marcus had been born in a charity hospital in Greenwood, Mississippi, in the summer of 1945. She'd been just 28 years old then, a widow whose husband had died in France during the final months of World War II, leaving her alone with a baby boy and nothing but her faith and her strong hands to see them through. Those hands had done a lot of work over the years. They'd scrubbed floors and washed dishes and changed bedpans. They'd picked cotton in Mississippi and cleaned houses in Memphis, and for the last 20 years, polished silver and vacuumed carpets at the Riverside Country Club in suburban Chicago, where the wealthy families paid her wages that were barely enough to get by on, but were still better than anything she could have found down south. Dorothy Mae had sacrificed everything for Marcus. She'd worked double shifts and saved every penny. She'd gone without new clothes and eaten day-old bread from the discount bakery. She'd lived in the smallest, cheapest apartments she could find, always in neighborhoods that made social workers shake their heads with concern. But she'd made sure Marcus had everything he needed: good shoes, school supplies, books from the library that she'd make him read aloud to her every evening, even though she'd only made it through 6th grade herself. She'd pushed Marcus hard, maybe too hard, some people said, but Dorothy Mae knew something those people didn't know. She knew that a black boy in America needed to be twice as good to get half as far. She knew that education was the only way out of the life she'd lived. She knew that her son's brilliant mind was a gift from God, and it would be a sin not to nurture it. Marcus had been reading by age 3. He'd skipped 2 grades in elementary school. By high school, he was taking classes at the local community college. Dorothy Mae would ride 3 buses to get to parent-teacher conferences, still wearing her work uniform because there wasn't time to go home and change. The other parents, the white parents in their nice clothes, would stare at her. Some would whisper. But Dorothy Mae held her head high. Her son was going to be somebody, and he was. Marcus had gotten a full scholarship to Northwestern University, then medical school at the University of Chicago, then a prestigious residency in cardiac surgery. At 40 years old, Dr. Marcus Thompson was one of the youngest and most respected cardiac surgeons in the Midwest. He'd published papers. He developed new surgical techniques. He'd saved hundreds of lives, but there was a problem, one that had been growing for years, creating a distance between Dorothy Mae and her son that felt wider than the Grand Canyon. Marcus had changed his name. Not legally, not officially. But when he'd started medical school, he'd quietly begun introducing himself as Marcus Thompson instead of Marcus Johnson. Thompson had been his father's name, Dorothy Mae's married name, before she'd reverted to her maiden name, Johnson, after her husband died. Marcus said it was about honoring his father's memory, but Dorothy Mae knew the truth. Johnson was too common, too black. Thompson sounded more professional, more established. It was a small thing, Marcus had insisted. It didn't mean anything. But it meant everything to Dorothy Mae. It meant that her son, the boy she'd raised to be proud of who he was and where he came from, was trying to distance himself from his past. From her. The distance had grown over the years. Marcus had married a woman named Patricia, a sophisticated radiologist he'd met during his residency. Patricia was black too, but she came from a different world, a world of private schools and debutante balls and summer homes. Patricia was lovely and polite to Dorothy Mae, but there was always a coolness there, a subtle condescension. They'd had 2 children, Marcus Jr. and Ashley, beautiful children who called Dorothy Mae Grandma Dot, but saw her maybe twice a year, always at carefully orchestrated visits where Patricia would hover anxiously, as if worried that poverty might be contagious. Marcus had bought his mother this small apartment 5 years ago. It was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived, with a real bathroom and a kitchen with modern appliances. He sent her money every month, money she usually saved or sent to her church. He called every few weeks, brief conversations where he'd ask about her health and she'd ask about the grandchildren, and they'd both pretend that everything was fine, that there wasn't this enormous unspoken thing between them. Dorothy Mae had stopped going to his house 3 years ago after an incident at a dinner party. Patricia had introduced Dorothy Mae to her friends as Marcus's mother, who used to work in domestic service, her tone making it clear that this was something quaint and distant, like saying someone's grandmother had once been a flapper. Dorothy Mae had smiled and nodded, but inside something had broken. She wasn't ashamed of her work. She'd never been ashamed. But Marcus was, and that hurt more than anything. Still, Dorothy Mae prayed for her son every morning. Still, she loved him with a fierceness that hadn't diminished one bit over the years. He was her boy. He always would be. Mrs. Morrison was shouting, "How dare you show your face here after what your husband did to my family?" "I didn't know," Jennifer was crying. "I swear I didn't know. Gerald never told me anything about. Your husband destroyed my nephew's business. He's being investigated by the SEC because of the information your husband leaked. My sister's family is ruined." Other women had gathered, drawn by the drama. Dorothy Mae stood frozen, not sure whether to slip away quietly or stay in case someone needed help. She'd learned over the years that the best strategy was usually to become invisible during these kinds of scenes. "I'm leaving Gerald," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "I found out what he'd been doing. The affairs, the insider trading, all of it. I filed for divorce yesterday. I didn't know, Mrs. Morrison. I swear I didn't know." "Well, you're certainly not welcome here," Mrs. Morrison said coldly. "This club has standards. We don't associate with criminals or their enablers." Mrs. Helen Hartwell, Jennifer's mother-in-law, stepped forward. She was a formidable woman in her 70s, elegant and composed. "Cynthia, that's enough. Jennifer is my guest, and she will be treated with respect." "Your guest?" Mrs. Morrison laughed harshly. "Helen, wake up. Your son is a criminal, and this woman was married to him. She's probably just as corrupt as he is." "I said that's enough." Mrs. Hartwell's voice was steel. "Jennifer has done nothing wrong. She's the victim in all of this." The confrontation continued, getting uglier by the minute. Dorothy Mae finally decided to slip away and give them privacy for their drama. Rich people's problems, she thought. Different from her problems, but problems nonetheless. She was returning to her cleaning supplies when she heard the overhead announcement. "Dorothy Johnson, please report to the employee office immediately. Dorothy Johnson to the employee office." Dorothy Mae's heart sank. In 20 years, she'd never been called to the employee office in the middle of her shift. It was never good news. Had she done something wrong? Was she being let go? At 68 years old, she was one of the oldest employees. Maybe they'd decided it was time for her to retire. She made her way to the small office near the kitchen, her stomach churning with anxiety. Mrs. Patricia Simmons, the club's human resources manager, was waiting for her. Mrs. Simmons was a stern woman in her 50s who took her job very seriously. "Dorothy, sit down," Mrs. Simmons said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Dorothy Mae sat, her hands gripping her Bible, which she'd learned to keep in her apron pocket. "Did I do something wrong, Mrs. Simmons?" No, nothing like that." Mrs. Simmons paused. "Dorothy, we received a phone call a few minutes ago from Memorial Presbyterian Hospital. There's been an emergency. Your son has been taken into surgery." The world tilted. Dorothy Mae gripped the edge of the chair. "My son, Marcus, what happened?" "I don't have many details. The hospital said it was a cardiac emergency. They found your employment information in his wallet, and our number was listed as an emergency contact. They asked if you could come to the hospital." Marcus, her beautiful, brilliant boy, a cardiac emergency, a surgeon with a heart problem. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. "I need to go," Dorothy Mae said, standing up so quickly that she almost fell. "I need to go right now." "Of course, take as much time as you need. Do you need help getting there?" "I'll take the bus. I know which buses." "Dorothy, let me call you a taxi. The club will pay for it. You need to get there quickly." 20 minutes later, Dorothy Mae was in the back of a taxi, still wearing her work uniform, clutching her Bible and a plastic bag with her street clothes that she hadn't had time to change into. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man named Frank who'd been driving in Chicago for 30 years, saw her distress in his rearview mirror. "Family emergency?" Frank asked kindly. "My son," Dorothy Mae said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's in surgery, his heart." "I'll get you there fast," Frank promised. Frank was good to his word. He drove with purposeful speed, taking shortcuts through side streets, and got Dorothy Mae to Memorial Presbyterian Hospital in 20 minutes instead of the usual 40. When they pulled up to the main entrance, Frank turned around in his seat. "That's $18.50, he said. Then, seeing Dorothy Mae fumble with her small change purse, he shook his head. "You know what? Don't worry about it. You go be with your son. I got kids, too. I understand." "Sir, the club is paying. I don't care who's paying. You go. Your boy needs you." Dorothy Mae's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. God bless you." She rushed into the hospital, her worn shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The main lobby was enormous and intimidating, all marble and glass and modern art. A volunteer at the information desk, a sweet-faced elderly woman, directed her to the cardiac surgery wing on the 5th floor. Dorothy Mae took the elevator up, her heart pounding. "Please God," she prayed silently, "please let my baby be okay. Please." The 5th floor was quieter, more serious. The walls were painted a soothing blue-gray, the carpet muffled footsteps. Dorothy Mae followed the signs to the surgical waiting area, a spacious room with comfortable seating, magazines, a coffee station, and large windows overlooking the city. And that's when she'd encountered Nurse Jennifer Hartwell at the desk. Now back to where we started. "Dr. Thompson." Nurse Hartwell repeated, her face going from pale to red. "Dr. Marcus Thompson is your son?" "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Dorothy Mae said. She was still calm, but inside she was screaming. Every second she stood here arguing was a second she wasn't getting information about Marcus. Nurse Hartwell picked up the phone at the desk, her hands shaking slightly. She spoke in a low voice to someone, then hung up. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice completely different now. "I didn't realize. I should have asked more questions. I just assumed. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson." "It's Mrs. Thompson," Dorothy Mae said quietly. "I took back my maiden name after my husband died, but my son uses his father's name. Now, please, can you tell me what happened to my boy?" Before Nurse Hartwell could answer, Dr. Richard Chen, the chief of cardiac surgery, came through the double doors that led to the operating suites. Dr. Chen was a small man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of gentle demeanor that immediately put people at ease. He walked directly to Dorothy Mae. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been operating with your son, Dr. Thompson, for the past 7 years. Marcus is one of the finest surgeons I've ever had the privilege to work with." "What happened to him?" Dorothy Mae asked, her voice breaking. "He collapsed this morning during pre-op rounds. We believe he's had a significant cardiac event, possibly a heart attack. He's in surgery now. Dr. Peterson, our best cardiothoracic surgeon, is operating. Marcus is getting the absolute best care possible." Dorothy Mae swayed. Dr. Chen immediately took her arm and guided her to a chair. "Sit down, please. Can someone get Mrs. Johnson some water?" Nurse Hartwell rushed to comply, returning seconds later with a paper cup of cold water. She handed it to Dorothy Mae, her face burning with shame. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. Dorothy Mae drank the water, trying to process what she'd just learned. Marcus had collapsed, her strong, healthy boy, a heart attack. How was that possible? He was only 40 years old. He was a cardiac surgeon. He knew how to take care of his heart, didn't he? "When will he be out of surgery?" Dorothy Mae asked. "It could be several hours," Dr. Chen said gently. "These procedures are complex. But Dr. Peterson is excellent. Marcus is in the best possible hands. Can I stay? Can I wait here?" "Of course, you're his mother. You have every right to be here." Dr. Chen shot a pointed look at Nurse Hartwell, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Dr. Chen left to return to the surgical suite, promising to update Dorothy Mae as soon as he had news. Dorothy Mae sat in one of the comfortable chairs, still clutching her Bible, trying to pray, but finding that the words wouldn't come. All she could think was, "Please, God, please, not my boy, don't take my boy." The waiting room was filling up with other families. A young couple waiting for news about their newborn daughter's heart surgery. An elderly man whose wife was having a valve replacement. A middle-aged woman and her 3 adult children waiting for news about their father. They were all scared, all worried, all clinging to hope. Dorothy Mae was aware that people were staring at her. Her work uniform marked her as different from the other families in their business suits and casual designer clothes. But she didn't care anymore. Let them stare. Her son was fighting for his life. An hour passed. Then 2. Dorothy Mae sat in silence, her lips moving in constant prayer. And then Patricia arrived. Dorothy Mae heard her daughter-in-law before she saw her. Patricia's heels clicked rapidly across the floor and her voice carried across the waiting room. "Where is he? Where's Marcus? Someone needs to tell me what's happening right now." Patricia Thompson was everything Dorothy Mae was not. She was tall and slender, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Dorothy Mae's monthly rent. Her hair was relaxed and styled perfectly. Her nails were manicured. She wore gold jewelry and designer shoes. She looked like she belonged in this hospital, in these surroundings. Patricia's eyes swept the waiting room and landed on Dorothy Mae. Something flickered across Patricia's face, surprise, maybe, or dismay. "Dorothy," Patricia said, her voice carefully controlled. "I didn't expect to see you here." "He's my son," Dorothy Mae said simply. "Yes, of course." Patricia sat down, but not next to Dorothy Mae. She chose a chair on the opposite side of the waiting area. "Have you heard anything?" "Dr. Chen came out about an hour ago, said it could be several more hours." Patricia nodded, pulling out her cell phone, one of those new mobile phones that were becoming popular among people who could afford them. She began making calls, her voice low and urgent. Calling family members, Dorothy Mae assumed. Calling friends, making arrangements. Patricia made a dozen calls. Not once did she come over to sit with Dorothy Mae. Not once did she ask how Dorothy Mae was holding up. They sat on opposite sides of the waiting room like strangers, united only by their love for the same man. Another hour passed. Dorothy Mae got up stiffly, her knees protesting, and walked to the coffee station. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, the good kind, not the instant coffee she made at home, and turned to find Patricia standing behind her. "Dorothy, we need to talk," Patricia said quietly. "About what?" "About Marcus, about his condition." Patricia glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "The thing is, Marcus has been under a lot of stress lately, a lot of pressure. He's been working 16-hour days, sometimes more. He hasn't been sleeping well. I've been worried about him, but he wouldn't listen." Dorothy Mae said nothing, just waited. "What I'm saying is, this isn't completely unexpected. Marcus has been pushing himself too hard for years. He's always been like that, driven to prove himself, to be the best. To show everyone that he's more than—" Patricia stopped abruptly. "More than what?" Dorothy Mae asked quietly. Patricia had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Nothing. I just meant that Marcus has always been very ambitious." "You were going to say more than where he came from," Dorothy Mae said. "More than his mama who scrubs floors, more than a poor black boy from Mississippi." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The tension between them was palpable. They stood there, 2 women who loved the same man, separated by class and education and 1,000 unspoken resentments. Before either could say anything else, Dr. Chen came through the surgical doors again, this time with Dr. Peterson beside him. Dr. Peterson was younger, maybe 50, with the confident bearing of someone who was very good at his job. Both Dorothy Mae and Patricia rushed over. They arrived at the same moment, standing side by side for the first time. "Mrs. Thompson." Dr. Peterson said, looking at Patricia. "Yes," Patricia said. "I'm Mrs. Thompson, too," Dorothy Mae said. "I'm his mother." Dr. Peterson nodded respectfully to both women. "Marcus came through the surgery. He's stable and he's going to recover." The relief was so intense that Dorothy Mae felt her knees buckle. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Patricia let out a small sob. "What happened?" Patricia asked. Why did he have a heart attack? He's only 40 years old. He's healthy. He exercises. It wasn't a typical heart attack, Dr. Peterson explained. Marcus had an undiagnosed congenital heart defect, a small hole between the chambers of his heart that he's probably had since birth. It's something that often doesn't cause symptoms until middle age, when it can suddenly become critical. Combined with stress and overwork, it created a perfect storm. We've repaired the defect and Marcus should make a full recovery, but he's going to need to make some significant lifestyle changes. A heart defect since birth? Dorothy Mae said, her mind reeling. How is that possible? He never had any problems as a child. These defects are often silent, Dr. Peterson said. Many people live their whole lives without knowing they have them. Marcus was actually very lucky. If this had happened while he was operating or while he was driving, the outcome could have been very different. When can we see him? Patricia asked. He's in recovery now. It'll be another hour or so before he wakes up. Then we'll move him to the cardiac ICU. You can see him briefly then, but he'll need rest. The next 24 hours are critical. Dr. Peterson left to check on his other patients. Dorothy Mae and Patricia stood in silence, processing the news. Marcus was alive. He was going to recover. Thank God, thank God. I need to call the children, Patricia said, pulling out her phone again. They're at my mother's house. They'll want to know their father is okay. Patricia walked away to make her calls, leaving Dorothy Mae alone with her thoughts. A heart defect since birth. Something Marcus had been born with, something Dorothy Mae had never known about. All those years of worrying, all those prayers, and it turned out her son had been walking around with a ticking time bomb in his chest. Dorothy Mae lowered herself back into her chair and finally, let herself cry. She cried for her son, for his pain, for all the years of distance between them. She cried for the little boy he'd been, reading books by flashlight under his covers. She cried for the young man who'd graduated from medical school and couldn't quite meet her eyes. She cried for the successful surgeon who'd changed his name and moved to the suburbs and seemed almost embarrassed by where he'd come from. And then she cried for herself, for all the sacrifices she'd made, for the loneliness of being proud of your child but feeling like you'd lost them anyway. An hour later, a nurse came to tell them Marcus was awake and asking for family. Patricia went first as his wife. Dorothy Mae waited, understanding that Patricia had the right to see him first, even though it hurt. 10 minutes later, Patricia emerged from the ICU, her makeup smeared from crying. She walked over to Dorothy Mae, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, she sat down next to Marcus's mother. He wants to see you, Patricia said. He's asking for you. He keeps saying, "Where's my mama? I need my mama." Dorothy Mae stood up, her whole body trembling. She walked through the double doors into the ICU, a nurse guiding her to Marcus's bedside. Marcus lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. He had tubes and wires connected to him, monitors beeping steadily. His face was pale, but his eyes were open, and when he saw Dorothy Mae, he started to cry. "Mama," Marcus said, his voice weak. "Mama, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Dorothy Mae took her son's hand, the hand of the boy she'd raised, the brilliant surgeon whose life she'd sacrificed everything to make possible. "Hush now," she said gently. "You hush, you're going to be fine." "I should have died," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. "I was on the operating table, Mama, and I thought I was going to die, and all I could think about was how I'd wasted so much time, how I'd pushed you away, how I'd been ashamed of you, ashamed of where I came from, and that was the worst sin of all." "Don't talk like that," Dorothy Mae said, but Marcus kept going, the words pouring out of him like he'd been holding them back for years. "When I was going under the anesthesia, I thought about that time in medical school when you came to my graduation, and I introduced you as someone who used to work in housekeeping, like your job was in the past, like you'd retired with dignity instead of still scrubbing toilets to help pay my student loans. I thought about how I changed my name because Johnson sounded too common, too black, and Thompson sounded like old money. I thought about how I moved to the suburbs and joined the country club and bought the big house, and I almost never invited you over because I was afraid." His voice broke. "I was afraid my colleagues would see you in your work clothes and know the truth about me. The truth about you is that you're a good man," Dorothy Mae said firmly. "A brilliant surgeon who saves lives every day. The truth about me is that I'm the son of the strongest, most dignified woman I've ever known, and I spent 20 years trying to hide that fact." Marcus gripped his mother's hand tighter. "When I thought I was dying, I realized that the thing I was most proud of in my whole life was being your son. Not my medical degree, not my publications, not my big house. Being Dorothy Mae Johnson's son, that's who I am. That's who I've always been." And I'm sorry it took almost dying for me to remember that. Dorothy Mae couldn't speak. She just held her son's hand and cried. I love you, Mama, Marcus said. I love you and I'm sorry, and if you'll forgive me, I promise I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the man you raised me to be. Baby, you are the man I raised you to be, Dorothy Mae said. You save lives, you help people, you're brilliant and kind and good. You just forgot for a little while that it's okay to be all those things and still be yourself. It's okay to be successful and still remember where you came from. It's okay to be Dr. Marcus Thompson and also be that little boy who used to read library books out loud to his mama. They sat together in the ICU, mother and son, the distance that had grown between them over the years finally beginning to close. Dorothy Mae told Marcus about her morning, about her prayer for guidance, about the confrontation at the hospital. Marcus listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't in years. That nurse who tried to keep you out, Marcus said. What was her name? Jennifer Hartwell? Marcus's face showed recognition. Helen Hartwell's daughter-in-law. I know Helen, she's been a patient of mine for years. She's a wonderful woman. He paused. Nurse Hartwell was wrong to judge you based on how you were dressed. That was prejudice, plain and simple. The same kind of prejudice I've spent my whole career trying to avoid being subjected to. Baby, she didn't know. She made a mistake. She apologized. But she shouldn't have made that assumption in the first place, Marcus said. She saw a black woman in a work uniform and assumed you didn't belong, just like people have seen me a black man and assumed I didn't belong in medical school or in the operating room or in the country club. I've spent my whole life fighting against those assumptions, and then I turned around and made the same mistake. I assumed that distance from my past would protect me from prejudice, but all it did was make me lose myself. Over the next few days, as Marcus recovered in the hospital, things began to change. Patricia came every day, and she started sitting with Dorothy Mae in the waiting room. At first, the conversations were stilted and awkward. But gradually, they began to really talk, for the first time in years. Patricia told Dorothy Mae about her own struggles, how she'd grown up in a family that valued appearances above all else, how she'd been taught that success meant hiding anything that didn't fit the image of perfection. She talked about the pressure of being a black professional woman, of always having to be twice as good and never being able to show weakness or vulnerability. I think I resented you, Patricia admitted one afternoon. Not because of who you are, but because you represent something I was taught to run from. My parents spent their whole lives trying to escape the stigma of poverty and working-class jobs. They pushed me to marry someone successful, someone who would secure our place in the upper class. And Marcus was perfect, brilliant, ambitious, destined for success. But you reminded me that no matter how high we climb, there are people who will always see us as less than, who will always judge us by our skin color and our bank accounts. And I thought if we just tried hard enough, if we were successful enough, we could rise above all that. Baby, you can't run from who you are, Dorothy Mae said gently. I learned that a long time ago. I'm a black woman who cleaned houses for a living. That's not something to be ashamed of. It's honest work, hard work. Work that put food on the table and sent my son to medical school. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my life, even the hard parts, maybe especially the hard parts, because those hard parts made me strong. They taught me dignity and faith and perseverance. Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. I've wasted so much time trying to be someone I'm not, trying to fit in with people who will never fully accept me anyway, and I pushed Marcus to do the same thing. I encouraged him to distance himself from his past, to polish his image, to be the kind of doctor who gets invited to all the right parties. I thought I was helping him, but I was just feeding his insecurity. You love my son, Dorothy Mae said. That's what matters, and now you both have a chance to figure out who you really want to be. On the 4th day after his surgery, Marcus's children came to visit. Marcus Jr. was 12 and Ashley was 9. They were beautiful children, smart and well-mannered, but they seemed almost like strangers to Dorothy Mae. She'd seen them so rarely over the years, always at carefully controlled visits where everyone was on their best behavior. But this visit was different. Marcus introduced Dorothy Mae properly for the first time in years. Kids, this is your grandmother, my mama. Her name is Dorothy Mae Johnson, and she's the most important person in my life. She worked hard her whole life to give me opportunities. She sacrificed everything so I could become a doctor. Every good thing I've ever done, every life I've ever saved, I owe to her. Marcus Jr. and Ashley looked at their grandmother with new eyes. They asked questions. What had it been like growing up in Mississippi? What was their dad like as a kid? What kind of work did she do? Dorothy Mae answered honestly, telling them about picking cotton and washing dishes and cleaning houses. She told them about the civil rights movement, about watching Martin Luther King Jr. on television and knowing that the world was changing, even if it wasn't changing fast enough. She told them about their grandfather who died in the war before Marcus was born. The children listened, fascinated. They'd learned about history in school, but this was different. This was their history, their family's history. This was real. "Grandma," Ashley said, "why don't we see you more often?" Dorothy Mae glanced at Marcus, who looked away, ashamed, but Patricia answered, "That's our fault, sweetheart. Your father and I made some bad choices. We kept Grandma at a distance because we were worried about what other people would think, but that was wrong. Family is more important than what anybody thinks." "Can we see you more?" Marcus Jr. asked. "Can you come to our house for Sunday dinner?" Dorothy Mae smiled. "I'd like that very much." On the 6th day, Marcus was moved out of the ICU and into a regular room. He was doing well, much better than anyone had expected. His recovery was progressing smoothly. The doctors said he'd be able to go home in a few more days, though he'd need several months of rest and rehabilitation before he could return to work. That afternoon, Marcus had an unexpected visitor. It was Nurse Jennifer Hartwell, the woman who'd tried to keep Dorothy Mae out of the surgical waiting room. She knocked hesitantly on Marcus's door, looking nervous. "Dr. Thompson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I needed to apologize." Marcus gestured for her to come in. Dorothy Mae was there, sitting in the chair beside his bed. Jennifer's face flushed when she saw Dorothy Mae. "I'm so sorry," Jennifer said, her words tumbling out. "I was wrong. I judged your mother based on how she was dressed, and I made assumptions that were completely out of line. It was prejudiced and cruel, and I'm ashamed of myself. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I realized that I did the exact same thing that people have been doing to me lately, making judgments without knowing the full story." "Sit down," Marcus said gently. "Please." Jennifer sat down, looking like she wanted to cry. Dorothy Mae recognized the look. This was a woman who'd been through something difficult. "My mother-in-law, Mrs. Hartwell, told me what you did for her last year," Jennifer said. "She had that emergency bypass surgery, and you stayed with her for 14 hours, personally overseeing every aspect of her care. She said you were the kindest, most skilled doctor she'd ever encountered. She said you treated her like she was your own mother." Marcus nodded. "Mrs. Hartwell is a wonderful woman. I was honored to care for her. When I stopped your mother from seeing you, I didn't know who she was. But even if she wasn't your mother, even if she was just a housekeeper from a country club, I had no right to treat her that way. I had no right to assume she didn't belong or that she didn't matter. I did to her exactly what people have been doing to me, judging based on associations and assumptions rather than on the actual person standing in front of me." "What do you mean?" Dorothy Mae asked, gently. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I'm in the process of divorcing my husband. He's been charged with insider trading and fraud. It's all over the news. And suddenly, people who were friendly to me last week won't return my calls. Women I thought were my friends crossed the street to avoid me. I've been uninvited from parties and committees. People see me and see my husband's crimes like I'm guilty by association, like I'm not my own person with my own integrity." "I'm sorry that's happening to you," Marcus said. "The worst part is that I've been doing the same thing to other people for years without even realizing it," Jennifer continued. "Judging people based on superficial things, making assumptions, and I'm ashamed. I'm so deeply ashamed." She turned to Dorothy Mae. "Mrs. Johnson, can you forgive me?" Dorothy Mae reached out and took Jennifer's hand. "Baby, I forgave you the moment it happened. We all make mistakes. We all have prejudices we need to work on. The important thing is that you recognize it and you're trying to do better." Jennifer started to cry. "I don't know how to do better. Everything I thought I knew about life and people has been turned upside down. I thought if I married the right person and lived in the right neighborhood and belonged to the right club, I'd be happy. I'd be secure. But none of it meant anything. It was all a facade." "Then build something real," Dorothy Mae said. "Something based on who you actually are, not who you think you should be. It's never too late to start over. I started over when I was widowed at 28 with a baby and no education. If I could do it, you can too." Over the next hour, the three of them talked. Jennifer told her story, how she'd married young, how she'd ignored red flags about her husband's behavior, how she'd spent years trying to fit into a world that never quite felt right. Marcus told his story, how he'd changed his name and distanced himself from his past, how he'd almost lost himself in the pursuit of success. Dorothy Mae told her story about Mississippi and Chicago, about scrubbing floors and raising a son, about dignity and faith and survival. When Jennifer finally left, she hugged Dorothy Mae. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me grace I didn't deserve." After Jennifer left, Marcus turned to his mother. "Mama, I've been thinking. When I get out of here, I want to make some changes, big changes." "What kind of changes?" I'm going to cut back my hours at the hospital. No more 16-hour days, no more weekends at the office. I want to spend time with my family. Real time, not just showing up for dinner after everyone's already eaten. That sounds good, baby. And I want you to move closer. Maybe not in with us. I know you value your independence, but closer. Maybe in our neighborhood. We'll help you find a nice apartment. And I want you to come to Sunday dinner every week. I want my kids to know their grandmother, really know her. I want them to hear your stories and learn from your wisdom. I'd like that, Dorothy Mae said softly. And one more thing, I'm going back to Johnson. Professionally, I'll still be Dr. Thompson. That's the name on all my publications and credentials. But personally, socially, I'm Marcus Johnson. I'm Dorothy Mae Johnson's son. That's who I am, and I'm not hiding it anymore. Dorothy Mae squeezed her son's hand. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when you couldn't see it. 2 weeks later, Marcus came home from the hospital. His house in the suburbs was large and beautiful, with a swimming pool and a manicured lawn and expensive furniture. But for the first time, Dorothy Mae felt welcome there. Patricia had prepared the guest room for her, not the small room at the back of the house where she'd stayed before, but the large guest suite with its own bathroom and a view of the garden. The first Sunday dinner was awkward, everyone trying too hard. But by the third week, things had relaxed. Dorothy Mae taught Ashley how to make her famous cornbread. She told Marcus Jr. stories about his father as a boy. She sat in the living room with Patricia and talked about books and recipes and life. Marcus was following doctor's orders, taking it easy, working from home part-time. He and Dorothy Mae took walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his work, really told her, not just the sanitized version he'd given her before. She told him about the people at the country club, about Mrs. Whitmore and the Pattersons, and even about Mrs. Morrison and the drama in the locker room. One evening, about a month after Marcus came home, he brought up Jennifer Hartwell again. Mama, you remember that nurse who tried to keep you out of the hospital? Of course, Jennifer, what about her? She came to see me at my office today. She's been having a hard time. The divorce is getting ugly. Her husband's legal troubles are affecting her professionally, and she's struggling. She asked if I knew of any opportunities, any places that might be hiring. Poor girl. I told her about an opening at the community health clinic downtown. It's where I volunteer twice a month. They need nurses, and it's good work helping people who don't have access to quality health care. She seemed interested. That would be good for her. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is losing everything we thought mattered so we can figure out what really matters. Marcus smiled. You've always been so wise, Mama. How did you get so wise? By making mistakes, baby. By struggling, by having to start over more times than I can count. Wisdom doesn't come from success. It comes from surviving failure with grace. 3 months later, on a cold December morning, Dorothy Mae was back at Riverside Country Club. She'd chosen to keep working despite Marcus's protests. She didn't need the money anymore. Marcus was making sure she was taken care of, but she liked the work. She liked having a purpose. She liked the rhythm of her days. She was cleaning the ladies' locker room when she heard familiar voices. Mrs. Helen Hartwell and Jennifer were there, using the facilities before a tennis match, but everything had changed. Jennifer wasn't a guest anymore. She was a member, sponsored by her mother-in-law, whose membership was independent of her son's. Jennifer's divorce had been finalized. She was working at the community health clinic and seemed genuinely happy. Good morning, Mrs. Johnson, Jennifer said warmly when she saw Dorothy Mae. Good morning, Jennifer. Morning, Mrs. Hartwell. The three women chatted for a few minutes. Mrs. Hartwell asked about Marcus, and Dorothy Mae shared that he was doing well, getting stronger every day. Jennifer talked about her work at the clinic, how meaningful it was to help people who really needed it. After they left, Dorothy Mae continued her work, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. One crisis, one moment of vulnerability had transformed multiple lives. Marcus had remembered who he really was. Patricia had learned to value substance over appearances. Jennifer had found a new path, and Dorothy Mae had gotten her son back. That evening, Dorothy Mae went to Marcus and Patricia's house for Sunday dinner, as she did every week now. The whole family was there, Marcus, Patricia, the kids, and even Patricia's parents, who'd driven in from Detroit for the weekend. During dinner, Marcus stood up with his glass of water. I want to make a toast, he said, to my mama, Dorothy Mae Johnson, the strongest, wisest, most loving person I've ever known. Mama, you worked hard your whole life to give me opportunities. You sacrificed everything, and for too long I repaid that by trying to distance myself from you. But I've learned something important. The things we try to hide are often the things we should be most proud of. I'm proud to be your son. I'm proud of where I come from, and I promise that for the rest of my life I'm going to live in a way that honors the lessons you taught me. Everyone raised their glasses. Patricia's mother, who'd been skeptical of Dorothy Mae at first, reached over and squeezed Dorothy Mae's hand. "You did good, Dorothy. You raised a good man." After dinner, while Patricia and her mother cleaned up the kitchen, Dorothy Mae sat in the living room with her grandchildren. Ashley was showing her a school project about family history. She'd interviewed Dorothy Mae weeks ago, recording stories about Mississippi and Chicago, about the civil rights movement and working at the country club. "Grandma, my teacher said our project was the best in the class," Ashley said proudly. "She said your stories were like living history." "That's because they are, sweetheart. History isn't just something in books. It's the lives we live, the choices we make, the struggles we survive." Marcus Jr., who was at that awkward age where he was too cool for most things, came over and sat down next to Dorothy Mae. "Grandma, I was thinking, maybe this summer could you take us to Mississippi? Could we see where you grew up, where Dad was born?" Dorothy Mae felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that very much. There's a lot to see there, a lot of history, some of it painful, some of it beautiful, all of it real." That night back in her new apartment, a nice one-bedroom place just 3 blocks from Marcus's house, Dorothy Mae knelt beside her bed to pray, as she did every night. "Lord, thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing this black mother what to do. Thank you for guiding my steps. Thank you for bringing my son back to me. Thank you for second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for reminding me that nothing we do in love is ever wasted. Amen." She climbed into bed and turned off the light. Tomorrow she'd get up early and go to work at the country club. She'd scrub floors and clean bathrooms and polish silver. And she'd do it with dignity and pride because she knew now what she'd always known deep down. That honest work was nothing to be ashamed of, that every person had value regardless of their job or their bank account, and that the strongest thing a person could be was themselves. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it. And maybe that was what life was about, learning who you really were, beneath all the masks and pretenses and fears. Learning to be proud of your story, all of it, the hard parts and the beautiful parts. Learning that dignity didn't come from what you owned or what you achieved, but from how you lived, how you loved, how you treated others. Dorothy Mae fell asleep with a smile on her face. Her son was alive and healthy. Her family was whole again. Her faith had been rewarded. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.